Okay, right. Now
Right,
we're going to talk
read
about
the manifesto.
politics.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to read the manifesto.
Are you all looking forward? Yeah, Aaron, you can't,
It's about 150 pages.
it's like doing your homework during the lesson. Hello and welcome to the third Politalk podcast. Today we are joined by our regulars.
Hello.
Hello?
And for the first time, we have a new person on the show for this week, and that is Ben, aka the Political Heckler, which is a blog he runs on the internet, and it'll be in the description below. And he's going to be joining us for the discussion of the election campaign, which has been going on for a few weeks now and has a few weeks left to run. And the most pressing thing that's come up this morning is Labour's Manifesto, which was published. So considering I'm surrounded by two committed Labourites, I think it's best to ask them what they make of it.
Well, I'm going to jump in and say it's a brilliant manifesto. I don't think anybody can argue that it's one of the best manifestos we've put forward for quite some time. It's also one of the best manifestos that Britain's actually had for quite some time. There's some brilliant things in there. £10 an hour, working wage, better working conditions, better holidays, an energy cap, but also nationalisation of energy companies, nationalisation of the rail. There's going to be £250 billion of investment. Basically, what we're seeing is a massive manifesto built of hope. And instead of the blatant austerity and cuts that blatantly haven't worked, what we're seeing now is a complete political change. And the amazing thing about this manifesto is people from the left and the right of the Labour Party are all coming out and saying it's one of the best manifestos we've produced.
On that point with energy nationalisation, because Corbyn said earlier that it was taking a public stake in the energy industry. He didn't say that they were going to come out and just nationalise the existing energy industries. What's your take on what the approach to nationalisation should be within these energy sectors? Should Labour just come out and just buy out the energy companies as they are and just run them themselves?
I would like to see that, but at the moment we have to acknowledge that money is a thing. So I think this is the best thing that we can do that is actually affordable.
Yeah, I mean, to buy out the companies themselves would run into the hundreds of billions of pounds to do it.
And we simply don't have the money, so we are making the best of the situation we've got.
Ben, what are your thoughts on, what's your favourite and least favourite policy from the Labour Manifesto?
Least favourite?
Favourite and least favourite.
I'll tell you what I thought was interesting, if that kind of works on the answer to the question.
That's fine.
The defence part of the manifesto is very interesting, considering a lot of people's conceptions on Corbyn in the past about his sort of attitudes towards the defence of the country. It's very, well, it's very negative against the Conservatives, how they've handled the defence. So they talk about how previous Labour governments have consistently spent above the NATO benchmark, which is 2% of GDP spending on military, which is something Trump goes on about. The Conservatives currently spend 2%, which is the benchmark, but Labour always spent above that. So it's interesting that Labour seem to be wanting to spend more on defence than the Conservatives. I mean, we don't know what the Conservatives are going to put in their manifesto, but I thought it was interesting to know.
It's interesting with Labour's manifesto though on Trident, because Corbyn opposes Trident and Labour are going to put it in, are going to support it and have supported it in the manifesto. Is it credible though for Corbyn to defend that policy?
Yes.
You think
the
so?
Labour Party, well, no leader believes in 100% of the policies of a manifesto. When you have a manifesto that's created by lots of different people, lots of different ideas, it makes sense that there are differing ideas and differing opinions. And in fact, Labour on defence is more creditable than the Conservatives. We're going to spend more money on defence by the looks of things.
How much more money?
Well, if you read the manifesto, it's sort of we're going to spend at least the 2%, but it looks like we'll be spending over.
Now,
But
what I'd be interested in though with that 2% is because at the moment the Conservatives include the pensions for military personnel and intelligence spending as part of the 2%. Would Labour maintain that definition of what constitutes defence spending, or would they remove things from it, thereby increasing spending relative to what we have now?
From what I've seen on the manifesto, it seems that they will keep that idea that pensions are part of this 2%, and maybe also add to it, because they talk about rolling out a Homes Fit for Heroes program. And
yes, yeah, that's insulating veterans' homes, isn't it, for free? Which
is an interesting title to give, considering the Lloyd George Homes Fit for Hero program went so brilliantly.
It's a good. Well, it's a good name.
It's a good name, but it has connotations of failure, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the 2% in both the Conservatives and Labour's mind includes spending on pensions, help for injured servicemen and women, and I think that'll stay.
Aaron, do you have any thoughts to add about the manifesto?
Nothing on the what's already been discussed. The university policy is a strange one. I very much support the scrapping of tuition fees, but I do think you need something to replace it, such as a graduate tax, which I don't believe I've read in the manifesto.
Well, the interesting thing about the university system, as far as I've read, is essentially it is a graduate tax as it stands. It's a weird one because of the way that the fees are just infeasibly large amounts of money now. Effectively, unless you earn like millions, you will pay back your 9% a year for 30 years, and then that'll be the end. That's the end of your repayment. So I think with tuition fees, the chief problem we have at the moment is A, that the upfront fees puts people off going, and B, that the burden for repaying falls mostly on those who are the poorest because they have the largest loans to repay.
But this is in contrast to the Tories, who have now increased. They very subtly did it sort of at the last moment, but they're now looking and allowing people to increase tuition fees.
Yes.
So at the moment it's 9,000, but that could rise to 11,000.
This is the key. This is the thing with the tuition fees that's changed since the agreement in 2010. That essentially the as far as I can tell, the deal between the Lib Dems and the Conservatives was that fees would rise, but there was a big rise in the repayment threshold, and crucially, an agreement that repayment threshold would rise with inflation, which is now what Tories have now abandoned since the last election, which means that over time, the central premise of you only pay back if you get a graduate job is just slowly going to erode itself. Because that's the basis of the current tuition fee system. What fairness it has comes from that contract of you're only going to pay back your fees when you actually are successful and get a graduate ethical job, and you're going to be better off.
In 2015 was the election of people said, there's no difference between our politicians anymore. No one can argue that 2017 has so many stark differences between all the political parties. And I think that's only a good thing for politics in Britain. I mean, we do now have diversity of ideas. And Labour certainly have the best ideas at the moment.
Well, you would say that.
I would, because it's true.
The corporation tax that Labour want to increase, the number they've given is very large for the amount they're going to get back in tax, and I wonder whether that's necessarily going to be borne out by actually what happens.
So it's an interesting number, isn't it?
It's I think like £18 billion. Sam will correct me. I'm sure if I'm wrong.
I think it's quite a how do you say it? It's quite a optimistic sort of number. I think
it's lots of the money for the projects is coming from corporation tax increases. The other figures are very small in comparison.
Yeah, and that'll mean a big sort of change in tactic if you get what I mean, like making corporation tax that much of the funding.
Yeah.
It's definitely a change in policy, and quite dramatic one.
I wonder though, Sam, whether, because my initial drawback from that kind of tax raise is that in maybe 5-10 years down the line, the actual money you gain from the increase diminishes as companies look to not base themselves in the UK or look to invest money elsewhere. And are you worried at all that we might get a bit of money in short term, but in the long term, that amount of money may diminish and we'll find ourselves with a bit of a black hole of funding that we thought we'd have that we don't?
No.
Not
is
at all.
The short answer. But in the manifesto, it states, if I remember, it says that corporation tax in the UK is the lowest of any major developed economy. So really, we're not looking at massive increases. What we're doing is we're standardizing what corporation tax should be. Under the Conservatives, corporation tax is too low, and it only makes sense that we correct and higher it. But also with the corporation tax, the Labour Party is ensuring to protect small businesses. So the small business owner isn't going to be affected by these major changes. All we're looking to do is to take more money off those large companies that can afford to pay more.
Is there some kind of threshold on when you start paying the higher rate of corporation tax? Is that what you mean?
There would be, yes.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense. I mean, I agree that it's probably too low, but I'd bump it up by maybe a point or two. I think going from 19 to 26. I'm assuming in the first year, it's not going to be a tiered thing, is a big jump to make very suddenly.
But then it was a big jump to make when the Tories cut corporation tax. So I think it works both ways.
It does. Obviously, leaving the EU and also raising corporation tax simultaneously, even if it's not a really high level now, the signals that it sends to businesses is not a particularly welcoming one. You might argue.
Yeah. That's kind of the point I was badly making earlier. It's going to be quite a shock to the system, a sudden jump like this, I think, especially to businesses that are unsure after the referendum vote last year.
When you boil it down, what Labour are looking at introducing with the whole taxation, from what I can tell, really doesn't affect the majority of people in Britain.
No.
Which I completely agree with. Like, it's all about labour equality, and people attack Labour saying they don't like looking after the people who have worked hard to do well for themselves. But the fact is, if you're earning over 123 grand a year, I don't think a 50p income tax rate is going to affect you that much, to be honest. I know I certainly wouldn't mind paying it.
Yeah, this is, I mean, as the title of the manifesto suggests, this is a manifesto for the many, not for the few. And there's so few people that will be having tax rises, and those that are having tax increases can afford to pay more, and so should.
I mean, humorously, that tagline was Tony Blair's tagline, which he used right at the end of his last PMQs. He ended it by saying, "For the many, not the few," which is quite funny. It's now being used again by Labour.
And probably quite a different manifesto to what he would have put forward.
I mean, actually, I tell you what though, the amount of money that Labour are seeking to take from higher taxpayers is, I think it's less dramatic than a lot of people were expecting. I was expecting more on income tax from higher earning taxpayers. I mean, it's hefty. It's definitely not insubstantial.
But it's not Marxist Trotskyist levels, is it?
No, it's not. But I would want to see the income tax raise be phased and not all in one go, because I do think you have to give people that, even if they're a bit better off, you do have to give people some time to adapt and know that it's coming and be able to plan ahead for it. Because you may, even if you're earning 80 grand a year, you may have a mortgage that's several £1,000s a month, and you can't immediately pay a big increase in tax. You may have to, say, hey, this is going to happen over time. In 3 or 4 years' time, it'll be at this level. I do think that you have to be careful with raising taxes and the rate you raise them at, especially.
One thing I would say as well, that one of the most exciting things in the manifesto for me was the environment and the energy sections of the Labour manifesto. They're just superb. So 60% fossil fuel free by 2030. That's such a brilliant policy. And it shows that the Labour Party is one of the only parties that's actually committed to trying to fight against climate change, which is one of the biggest crises we're facing. So for me, trying to, make, put a cap on energy prices, in some sense nationalizing some energy companies, but also taking the time to invest in renewable energy, in insulation for houses. This to me shows for a Labour Party that's looking at the big and the long-term issues and has a solution to the big and the long-term issues. And for me, no other party has demonstrated that they have a credible plan to tackle the environmental issues that Britain faces.
Well, I certainly think that the 60% renewable by 2030 is a policy that no Lib Dem would oppose. I think that's one area where the Lib Dems, the Greens, and now obviously Labour would have an awful lot of common ground.
But will it be
on
one
the
that the Lib Dems are advocating for in their manifesto?
I don't know. I mean, the Lib Dem manifesto is out tomorrow. I'm assuming there'll be stuff on the environment in it. Things like reintroducing environment subsidies. But obviously that 60% target is an aspiration. There's going to be practical policy measures to get to that point. And that's going to take the form of things like subsidising renewable energy sources and so on. And that's the kind of thing I couldn't see the Lib Dems opposing it, because we tried to bring a lot of it in during the coalition. If you look at the Green Investment Bank and the green energy subsidies that have now been reversed, a lot of them.
And the new Clean Air Act the Labour want to introduce is to heighten and improve air quality, because again that's a major killer amongst certain people in big cities. So the manifesto is just almost every policy is a winner. It's just I think it's a brilliantly well put manifesto. And I also like the bit as well where it mentions animals. It's got a little section, and it even talks about how the Labour Party introduced an end to fox hunting, and only the Labour government will maintain such bans, which again alluding to the Tories' policy to massacre innocent animals. So I think that the Labour manifesto overall is a brilliant feat of writing, and one I can't wait to see introduced.
Are there any other policies that people want to talk about from the Labour manifesto particularly?
I was just looking through now, and I thought it was quite interesting, the police and crime section.
Oh yes.
Seen that, considering the fiasco that happened on the radio with Diane Abbott.
Oh yes, everyone and their gran has heard about that since it happened.
Yeah. Well, the police and crime section of the Labour manifesto, I think, just definitely there's a lot of numbers in it, and I think that's just so to make sure that sure exactly what's happening. They talk about how they were going to recruit 10,000 more police officers to work on community beats. So that's, they say, equivalent to at least one more police officer on the beat in every neighbourhood in the country.
I mean, I do hope that promise, that line of one policeman for every ward is just a metaphorical line. They don't mean it literally, because obviously some wards need rather more policemen than others.
Yeah, well, I assume that would be the case.
But it is worth talking about, as I think as we transition towards talking about the campaign and Labour's strategy. This Diane Abbott interview that she did, like, easily the worst moment of the campaign so far for Labour.
And then she followed it up on local election night with more.
The problem is for Labour, like, that cut through. It went, cut through to people on Twitter who don't follow politics. Just from what I saw.
And what I was talking to a mate about this as well. It wasn't. Diana Abbott got a lot of abuse on Twitter, a lot of people having a go at her.
Yeah, she
because
always
she
gets
was
abuse on
female.
Twitter. But
Well, yeah, there were a lot of people having a go at her because she was female, because she was a black woman. But what she said on the radio was stupid, not because she's a woman, not because she's black, but because what she said was stupid.
because she's Shadow Home Secretary, and she should know what she's budgeting for policemen.
She should have had those figures, if not in her head, ready to go.
But I mean,
in front of her.
Yeah, on a human level, you can understand. Oh, she did 6 interviews, and the 7th one she lost her notes and it went wrong. But like my sister knew what happened, and she doesn't follow politics even in the slightest. So like it's really damaging for Labour. And Diane Abbott, for me, the idea that Labour want to make her Home Secretary is scary. It's a scary thought, but she will be in charge of MI5 and national security. Like,
and Labour are the ones having to chase. They're the ones having to gain up seats. They shouldn't be like putting themselves out there unprepared like that. They need to be more on the ball. They need to they're playing right into the Conservatives' hands with interviews like that.
I mean, Sam and Aaron, I mean, you're both in Labour. What's your take on Diane Abbott?
It was a truly bad interview. I don't think anyone denies it was an awful interview. But what's interesting for the whole campaign is nobody seems to be attacking the Labour Party on policy. It's always delivery and excess things. And so it's really annoying when Diane Abbott completely ruins a popular and strong policy announcement.
Strong and stable policy announcement?
It's annoying that Diane Abbott completely, mucked up what she was going to say. But when you get down to it, what she was trying to say, it all adds up, it's all accounted for, and it's a brilliant policy. So it's interesting how the campaign seems to be people attacking the Labour Party for mistakes like Diane Abbott made. But they can't actually argue with the actual policies that the Labour Party are putting forward. All they can do is criticise the mistakes that humans make. So I think that's quite an interesting dynamic to the campaign, is that on policy, the Labour Party is winning. But the question is, can we take these policies and present them in a way that the electorate want to see?
I think that's, absolutely correct.
Well, the only way Labour can win this election is by focusing on policies, because the Tories obviously are going to relentlessly focus on it and Jeremy Corbyn as a person and his team. But policy, you're right. Policy-wise, Labour are in a strong position. Most of their policies are popular. Some of them aren't. Notably, the one I saw that was most unpopular was the promise not to leave the EU without a deal, or something like that. Was one of the only ones that polled negatively. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Labour. I mean, on the flip side to the Diane Abbott fiasco, we had the leaked manifesto, which I think was definitely leaked by the leadership team. I don't think it was leaked by a anti-Corbyn guy.
And I think that was to showcase the policies early.
Exactly.
Because the policies are so good.
Brilliant. As a media
positive
move,
impact, didn't it?
As a media move, to leak your manifesto there, of which you know is full of good policies, and then have like 2 or 3 days of just blanket coverage of Labour's manifesto policies and not of Jeremy Corbyn, crucially, was a great move. I don't know where this Labour press team's been hiding for the past year, because you've been a shambles for Labour have been a shambles for the last year at least, and all of a sudden we're in the campaign. And they do something like this, which is savvy.
I think Sam's right in saying that Labour needs to sort out its kind of how it presents things. I think that's what the electorate's worried about. They're worried about somebody like Jeremy Corbyn being Prime Minister. They're worried about someone like Diane Abbott being Home Secretary.
We've said before on this podcast that Labour's biggest problem is with communication and with convincing people that it knows what it's doing, and putting an effective message across to the population. And in the campaign so far, they've done a good job of it.
And they're getting good crowds out, which shows support, even if it doesn't translate into votes.
I mean, because Ben, you were at the Jeremy Corbyn Leeds rally yesterday, coincidentally, weren't you?
Yeah, it was. They closed the road of my way back home to work because there was so many students out there.
I mean, and that is like, I know that people who go to rallies are going to be very fervently Jeremy Corbyn fans, but that was a seriously impressive crowd for someone to get out. Like, regardless, even with that acknowledgement.
Yeah, it was a hell of a big crowd. But what you've got to recognise is that the point they'd chosen to hold that rally was in between two of the biggest universities in Leeds. And in
Okay. Was it near the halls, basically?
It was around the student sort of. I don't think they're not the student union area, but like a student housing area, and it was in between the University of Leeds and Leeds Beckett University. Leeds.
The only concern I have, and I'm interested to hear what Sam and Aaron say about this, is Leeds is generally a safe Labour city. There's no threat from the Conservatives in Leeds seat, and so it makes me think: well, if Jeremy Corbyn is going around campaigning in safe Labour seats, is he actually campaigning for the Labour leadership contest?
I don't think that's the case. I think the worry might be that the seats are less safe than we think.
Well, in Leeds?
Leeds Central is Hilary Benn's seat.
Yes, it's a massive Labour majority.
Massive. Absolutely.
We're talking 24,000 votes for Hilary Benn to 7,700 votes for the Conservative who's second.
Yeah.
The most marginal Labour Tory Leeds seat is Leeds North East, which is 23,000 votes for Labour to 15,000 votes for the Conservatives. Other than that, I mean, there's Leeds West is, again, pretty safe Labour territory, and then there's Leeds North West, which is a Lib Dem seat.
He was outside the Brudenell Social Club in Leeds, which is, as you would guess, like an old working man's pub.
Okay.
I'm just trying to work out which constituency that is. I think it might. Yeah, it's Leeds Northwest, which is a Lib Dem seat.
It is very narrowly a Lib Dem seat. Regmore Holland has it by about 2,000 votes. So it's interesting.
That would make sense as to why Corbyn was campaigning there.
Yes.
I mean, yes. I mean, if the students will come out and vote for him, we'll lose the seat.
And it's also interesting how much Labour is, certainly Labour students, we are pushing voter registration really hard. And
oh, absolutely. I'd be surprised if you weren't.
And students are registering to vote now in numbers greater than in 2015, it looks like so far. So we could see maybe an election decided by people under 30 in several constituencies.
This is the big unknown with the election. Because the polls are saying, you know, there's a big Conservative lead, and I don't think they're being manipulated at all. But polls can't pick up people who didn't vote last time voting because of the way the polls are weighted. If you say you didn't vote in 2015, your weighting is really reduced, drastically reduced. So if there's a big sudden movement of people who don't normally vote, whether they be students or otherwise, that suddenly go towards Labour, then it does have the potential to flip the whole thing on its head if we do get a very big turnout.
I think what the Labour need to be careful of though is, while all these students may be registering, are they actually going to end up voting?
So let's talk about the Liberal Democrats.
Who?
Now, yeah. So I think it's interesting to talk about them this campaign because it hasn't worked. It hasn't happened for them yet. For whatever reason, the party has not managed to motivate Remainers in the way that it hoped to do so. I think. Yeah. What do you guys think?
Well, you suffered one of your worst results in 2015.
Wasn't my fault.
And you're looking to it's all your fault. And you're looking to actually make worse losses. I mean, the current polls, I think you'll probably make losses if the polls continue at this rate.
It's difficult to tell because of tactical voting. I think losses are a possibility, net losses, which is surreal. Labour are suddenly got their act together and are doing a good campaign, so they're squeezing Lib Dem voters in seats where they should vote tactically, and I'm not surprised about that.
I mean,
you're currently facing the same problem that many people have been criticising the Labour Party for.
Yep.
The Labour Party saw a massive rise in membership, and hardly any of them went out onto the street to knock doors. And I think that's happening with the Lib Dems now.
I don't know. I mean, I don't. There's no information on how many people have been canvassing.
No,
it's just difficult to tell. But I think the main problem, weirdly, listen to it, is Europe. The policy isn't clear enough. I don't think. There's people who are ardent Remainers, but aren't being particularly inspired by the Lib Dem message on Europe. It's sort of, oh, we'll prevent hard Brexit and we'll have a referendum. I do think sometimes maybe would it be better just for them to say, we're going to remain. We're going to remain in the EU if you vote for us. Like, just be clearer about it.
The Lib Dem voters. I mean, I can't speak for all of them, but I think that I would imagine it's a majority voted Remain.
Oh, overwhelming majority voted Remain. There are some Leavers in the party. I've met a Lib Dem Leaver.
But I think the electorate wanted from Lib Dem is to say we'll overturn the EU, or at least hold a second referendum, which is something they've not promised.
I think there was an aim in the party to not completely alienate people who voted to leave.
But then,
and I think that's backfired.
A little bit. I think it is at the moment because I think the message is a little bit vague.
The Liberal Democrats are a protest party, and what they should have done is they should have said, we don't want to leave the European Union. If you want to remain in Europe, vote for us. And then they would have had 40-odd% of people who they could work with, who might be persuaded to vote Lib Dem.
Yeah.
But at the moment, they've got a wishy-washy, sort of middle-of-nowhere approach, and I don't think anybody's being drawn to it, whether they voted Remain or Leave.
I mean, yes.
I think they should have stuck to one way and hit that really hard and gotten a lot of protest votes.
Yeah,
but at the moment, I don't think their strategy is working.
That's one part of why I think the Dems are struggling. Other part of it is stuff that's more or less out of their hands, which is the UKIP vote. It's all going to the Tories. And the problem is, in lots of A seats that the Lib Dems hold and B seats that they're targeting, there's quite a substantial UKIP vote. Your task is made so much harder by that because there's just like 8,000 free votes for the Tories in key seats.
I think the UKIP votes, the collapse of UKIP at the local elections and in the polls is fascinating, really. I mean, as soon as they was essentially a one policy party.
Yeah,
and they've achieved their aim. So unless you want to now follow a manifesto which sounds more like the BNP, there's no real point to vote UKIP.
Yeah, and if we look at this in seat terms, I mean, if I'm looking at the Lib Dem seats now, we've got 9 seats, 8 from the last election, and then Richmond Park. Look at least half of them. We've got Southport, which is a majority of about 1,300 over the Conservatives, where the MP is stepping down. There's 7,500 UKIP votes there, and then in Carshalton and Wallington in South London, majority of 1,600 over the Tories, 7,000 UKIP votes, and then Norfolk North, 19,000, so it's a majority of 4,000 over the Tories, 8,300 UKIP votes. If Norman Lamb loses, I'll be genuinely upset by that because he's been such a good mental health campaigner. It really guts me that he might not be there. Leeds North West might be lost to Labour if students come out and vote. Richmond Park could be lost to the Tories if there's a swing back to them, which is possible.
That's the by-election you won, correct? That's
the by-election, yeah. So you're looking at like over half the seats that might be lost.
Ceredigion could be lost to Plaid. I'm just looking at the majority.
It's only 3,000.
3,000. Like if Green and Labour votes go to Plaid, then that's easily Ceredigion.
Exactly. So if we're looking at like 4, 5, 6 roughly of the Lib Dem seats are in threat, and then the seats they're going to gain, there's not many to look at.
I mean, you've got Vince Cable coming back.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think if you're looking at seats Lib Dems might gain, Cambridge Labour seat, majority of 600 votes. It narrowly went Labour last election at the worst ever point of the Lib Dems. I think the party will probably gain that back. Bath, Twickenham, as you say, Ben, Vince Cable's coming back. That's only a Tory majority of about 2,000 votes. So that's entirely possible. And these are places where UKIP have a very low vote share. So the central problem for the Lib Dems is that the seats they can take back, there's not many. Labour ones, Bermondsey, Bristol West, Cardiff Central, and Cambridge, and possibly Vauxhall. Vauxhall's the wild card here, because Vauxhall Labour have got 25,000 votes to the Lib Dems 3,000, but it's Kate Hoey's seat. And Kate Hoey is subject to a very, very vocal tactical voting Lib Dem campaign there, so she may well lose because it's a massively Remain voting constituency, like over 70%, and she's basically a UKIP MP.
She was on the boat with Farage on the Thames.
Exactly. So like that's on the front of like every bit of literature going out there. So that probably won't happen. It'll probably be a slasher majority, but she'll probably hang on for dear life.
As a Lib Dem, what would you make of the trends? Because at the moment, we're seeing a lot of Lib Dem votes going to the Conservatives.
Well, the thing is with the polls, and this is the thing I think we have to be careful about. I think between Lib Dems and Labour, because I think I've seen a few polls that seem to show Lib Dem votes going to Labour, is tactical voting. Because if you're doing a poll and you ring up some people that happen to be in X constituency that they want to vote Lib Dem, but they said that they're going to vote Labour because it's tactical, the poll can easily not poll some constituencies where you've got Labour voters voting for the Lib Dems. So it's entirely possible that the Lib Dem vote is being depressed. It's going to be lower, but you might get more. You might get a proportionally larger amount of seats than you might have expected. Look at the SNP, who got half the number of votes of the Lib Dems at the last election, got 50 odd seats. If the Lib Dem vote is clustered enough, is concentrated enough, then you may well find we get more seats than the polls would otherwise indicate. So it's difficult with the polls.
What we saw in the local elections, certainly in Wales and I think in parts of England, the main gains that the Tories were making were against independents and Lib Dems. So it's interesting that locally.
Well, the interesting thing,
Tories, not the Lib Dems.
The interesting thing with that is I tell you why a lot of Lib Dem seats went to the Tories. It's because the UKIP and the Labour votes switched to the Tories. In my ward in Somerset, we have a Lib Dem candidate and a Tory councillor who was incumbent. The Lib Dem vote went up by about 200 votes, but the Tory vote doubled because all the UKIP and loads of the UKIP and Labour voters voted Tory. I think that's going to be a common theme along a lot of seats where it's like, a Tory Lib Dem marginal, but Labour and UKIP votes are going Tory. Because if you're a Labour Brexiteer, you prefer the Tories to the Lib Dems. Really? So I think it's not so much that the Lib Dem vote is going down or that the Lib Dems are losing voters in large numbers. It's more a case that
they're just losing seats.
The opposition vote is coalescing behind one candidate, whether that's Labour votes going to the Tories or UKIP votes. So first past the post is, I think, probably going to screw the party quite hard this election.
And moving sort of on slightly to the SNP, it's interesting how UKIP had a referendum and won, and they've collapsed. And the SNP lost the referendum and grew. It's fascinating how losing something actually motivates people. But the SNP are also looking at making losses to the Conservatives as well.
The Conservatives and the Lib Dems, yeah. Looks like it. Because the projections I've seen seem to show the Tories will win like a dozen seats maybe in Scotland. Getting to that sort of figure.
I think that's because Ruth Davidson is incredibly likable and she's very popular in Scotland.
Yes. I think she's played a big part.
She masquerades as a working class woman who, anyone can be, and she's a working class Tory. And I think lots of people are being sucked in by her attitudes and personality. Because she's been on, humorous television shows like Have I Got News for You? And people generally have a warm reception for her. And I think she's the main problem, is because she's a lot more approachable than Nicola Sturgeon.
And the Labour Party in Scotland have just completely collapsed. I think you may well lose your last seat in Scotland this election. You may well be wiped out. Edinburgh South narrowly stayed Labour from the SNP, but I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I think the unionist vote is just going for Tories. I think it's a case of you've got unionists, you've got nationalists. The unionist vote is consolidating behind the Conservatives. And Labour are in the middle, like, I don't know what to do.
You've not seen Ruth Davidson on top of that tank in the news today?
Yeah. Yeah.
She's definitely uniting the unionist vote. I think people see him more of a strong opposition to Sturgeon. Because
we have this impression that the SNP are like the unified voice of Scotland, but only half the country voted against them, and now they're consolidating behind another party, which is going to properly challenge their hegemony over the Scottish parliamentary seats.
Wales and Scotland are different in that respect, because in Scotland the SNP are almost the incumbents.
Yeah.
With devolution, the SNP are the ruling party. And likewise in Wales, Welsh Labour is the ruling party. So there's a different dynamic there, because people might vote Tory in Scotland as a protest against the Scottish members of the Scottish Parliament.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like the Tories will win probably, you're looking at all the border seats. And some of the others, and then the Lib Dems will probably win Edinburgh West, because the local election results seem to be very, very strong there. That they came very clearly top of the votes there. So that's a very small majority over the Lib Dems, and then Eastern Bartonshire and North East 5 for the other two that may go to Lib Dems. So the SNP may find themselves down on sort of like the low 40s maybe.
Which is still, compared to 2010.
Oh, of course. That's still a massive majority of Scottish seats, but perception and the notion of the SNP are now going backwards and they're losing support completely undermines their case for a second independence referendum.
Yeah. And I think I was going back onto the Conservative growth, that with Labour being almost wiped out last time, it's really the only option for a protest against the SNP is to vote Conservative.
Yeah, and Labour are just...
They are the unionist party.
Well, it's in their name, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
Exactly. I think we better wrap it up there, because I've got to edit all of this together into a coherent podcast.
Have fun.
So thank you all very much for joining me for this episode. We will be back again in 2 weeks' time. And then the week after that, we will be back on Saturday the 10th of June for a post-election post-mortem on the Labour Party, shall we call it?
Or celebration.
One of those two. Okay, thank you all very much for watching, and we will see you next time.